The rain had come to Riverrun in a mournful shroud, a hush of mist-thin veils that softened torch glow into trembling halos and made every stone of the ancient redoubt gleam like a wet garnet. Within Lady Catelyn Stark's solar, the air smelled of damp wool and river silt. The hushed drip from the embrasure ticked steady as a wounded heart's pulse. She stood unmoving, fingers laced before her girdle, listening to that slow cadence and to the low crackle of the brazier, as if the two sounds alone might tell her whether the next step was justice or ruin. Jaime Lannister waited below in the dark, tethered no longer by iron chains but by the single thin promise she herself had lifted from his wrists. The memory of loosening those shackles stung like raw salt in an unhealed cut, so she pressed it deeper until pain became clarity. Robb had begged for patience. Her tall Sun King carried the raw, galvanic certainty of youth, yet even he sensed the enormity of what she proposed. A sword in a mother's hand may carve new graves for all her children, he had told her, voice hushed so the retainers might not hear doubt in their young wolf. He had meant no reproach, merely caution. But Catelyn could not live upon caution any longer. She had bartered that coin once already, and it had bought her only the mockery of a Kingslayer's grin and Sansa's continuing captivity. Late that night she sought hall and hearth alike, weighing each counsel proffered. Lord Rickard Karstark, gaunt with grief, favored death and called it mercy for both his lost sons and the realm at large. Ser Brynden Blackfish warned of Tywin Lannister's wrath, hotter than dragon fire. Even the silent stare of Roose Bolton carried unsaid risks too chill to name. Yet every argument circled back to the fragile thread of honor and the unspoken fear that, if sundered, it would unravel the North's whole cause. Honor had not saved Ned, she reminded them. Nor Bran's legs. Nor Arya from the roads. Dawn arrived cloaked in pewter skies, and the courtyard murmur rose like muted surf against a rocky strand. The men gathered in ringed tiers atop the battlements, mail dark with drizzle. At their center stood Jaime Lannister on the slick flagstones, wrists bound anew by gray leather thongs, golden hair plastered damp upon his brow. He looked thinner than she recalled, yet insolence still draped him more regally than any cloak of crimson velvet. When the Blackfish proclaimed the charges, regicide, treason, kinslaying, and the breaking of guest right, Jaime smiled as though each sin were an old lover's secret name. Catelyn descended the dais of the keep alone. Her steps did not falter, though the world felt as if it tilted with each pace, the river lapping at her feet, the wind scraping her cheeks with unseen claws. Robb watched from the parapet, jaw set in iron. He had granted her leave, though she could read in the stiffness of his shoulders how near he stood to barreling down the stair to halt her. He would not, for if the North were to bend, it must bend before its own lady, not to spare the life of a lion. "My Lady of Winterfell," Jaime drawled when she halted within arm's reach. Rainwater slid along the bridge of his straight nose. His eyes held not fear but curiosity, bright as candle flame in a cat-black night. "Have you finally brought me steel instead of questions?" "Aye," she said, drawing the sword Robb had laid across her palms an hour past. The blade was ice-cold, plain stark steel forged beneath another northern sky centuries gone. Her knuckles whitened around the leather grip. "For my husband, for my lord's son, for every soul your house has ripped from mine." Jaime inclined his head as though receiving a queen's accolade. "Then swing true, my lady. I should hate to die twice in the telling." She did not answer. She raised the sword in both hands, felt its weight pull upon her shoulders like the burden of every failed plea. The rain hissed against the edge when she leveled it above the Kingslayer's bared neck. Silence consumed Riverrun. Even the river seemed to hush at that moment, as though the trident itself paused to witness stark judgment. The stroke fell swift and sure. It was no clean pass. Jaime was taller than Ned, and her arms shook at the follow-through, but it bit deep into bone. A bright gout of blood leapt, steaming in the chill, and the Kingslayer crashed forward onto his knees, mouth shaped in a second smile that slipped unfinished. The blade came down again, and again, meticulous, until the breathless hush broke into ragged shouts and the golden head rolled free upon the stone. Catelyn scarcely heard. The sword slipped from her numb grip, clanging, and the courtyard's roar receded into a vast, watery cavern behind her ears. The world snapped back only when a single high cry rang from the battlements, a Karstark voice exalting vengeance fulfilled, and then another and another, until the air trembled with triumph and dread in equal measure. Bolton alone did not cheer. His pale eyes studied the severed head as if it were a rare specimen, curious rather than repulsed. He bent and retrieved the Lannister lion's mane, holding it by its matted gold to let the rain cleanse the gore. She would remember that image in uneasy dreams, a quiet man holding sunlight by the hair in a courtyard where the sun had not broken cloud in days. Robb descended, face unreadable. "Mother," he said, and drew her to him, heedless of the blood staining her sleeves. She felt stone steady beneath her feet again when his arms encircled her. But in that instant of shared breath she sensed the shape of fate altering around them, as subtle and unstoppable as a river changing course. By nightfall the head rode north with Rickard Karstark spitted on a pike, destined for the twins. As proof, Karstark declared that the young wolf understood the cost of Lannister hostages far better than Lord Walder Frey. In exchange, the Lord of the Twins would open his gates unquestioned. So asserted Karstark, yet others whispered that Frey would see insult where gifts were offered and demand twice the price. Roose Bolton petitioned to take the body south to Harrenhal to cast it before Tywin's feet and watch what fire the old lion would breathe. Such brand new fear might open cracks in the Lannister host, Bolton reasoned. Robb demurred. The body was burned instead beside the river, its ashes given to the flow so that Jaime Lannister would feed the crabs of the neck and the drowned trees of the Bight, not the ambitions of House Bolton. Within 2 days, ravens dove in all directions under banners of black quills and scarlet wax. One flew to King's Landing and plunged the Red Keep into shrieking disarray. Queen Cersei's wail, it was said, echoed so fiercely in Maegor's holdfast that mothers clutched babes to their breasts and small folk crossed themselves for protection against a lioness's curse. Lord Tyrion Lannister, hand of the king in all but name, read the letter twice in silence and ordered a second set of chains affixed to every door of his chambers that same afternoon. That night he slept with crossbow cranked beneath his pillow and dreamed of silver-haired girls who dangled keys just beyond his reach. The raven that found Lord Tywin soared over the muddy camps ringing Harrenhal and lit upon a lonely perch outside his pavilion. He read the message once, set it neatly upon the brazier, and watched orange tongues devour the parchment edge to curling edge. Then he donned his battered breastplate of heavy steel, stained dark by weather and smoke but polished at the twin lions upon the chest, and strode into the lists where his knights brawled for sport. Ser Adam Marbrand accepted the silent challenge. 20 strokes later, his splintered shield lay in the mud and his helm rang like struck bronze. Tywin dismissed him with a curt nod. No man spoke of grief again in that camp. They spoke only of retribution. At Winterfell, Bran Stark dreamed of crows' black wings beating against a snow-hung sky, scattering crimson feathers that might have been leaves, might have been blood. When he woke, Hodder paced the bedchamber at whispered command, though Bran had no memory of giving the order. Far to the south his mother swung a blade and his brother unsheathed a kingdom's fury, yet in the chill stone heart of Winterfell it was the ravens who whispered first of a lion's fall. Maester Luwin brought the tidings with a grave face and a second raven, its scroll unbroken. From Lord Robb himself, he said, placing the tiny roll upon Bran's lap. Bran traced the wax seal until the wolf's head left an imprint on his fingertip. Beneath that pressure the wax cracked. The words inside spoke of justice and necessity, but Bran read only the spaces between, and there he felt something vast and cold stirring like giants beneath the ice. In King's Landing, Sansa knelt before Queen Cersei in the sunny chambers that overlooked the charred blackened domes of the Dragon Pit. Cersei's eyes were twin shards of green glass gouged from a wall long ago, and in their polished depths Sansa saw a fury so raw it might rise and flay the city stone from stone. "Your brother's mother murdered mine," the queen hissed, voice smaller than the room, more venomous than any viper in Dorne. "Tell me, little dove, do you think a prayer will hush that grief?" Sansa tried to speak, but found her throat clotted with terror. She managed a whisper of apology. For what crime? She could not say. Her voice shook like a wounded harpstring, and the queen laughed, brittle as frost snapping upon glass. The laughter ceased abruptly. "You will write a letter," Cersei said, more command than suggestion. "A plea to your traitor brother. He will bend the knee, or I will send him your head to keep the Kingslayer company in whatever hell wolves haunt." The small folk whispered through alley and sept and wine sink that the Red Keep had become a tomb of grief. Some said Joffrey had insisted on displaying Jaime's twin swords upon the Iron Throne itself, so that every lord who knelt would feel the Kingslayer's ghost behind his knees. Others claimed the boy king wept in secret, though none dared bring that tale to the gold cloaks lest they find their tongues tied to the severed heads of wolves. Back at Riverrun, Robb convened a war council beneath banners still damp from rain. The map of the Riverlands lay spread across the long oaken table, its ink rivers swelling as spilled ale seeped into parchment. Lord Edmure fretted over Stone Mill and Seaguard while the Blackfish argued for swift assault on Lannisport before the Lannisters could consolidate. Roose Bolton murmured that Casterly Rock itself might be taken by blade in the night if the right blade were offered. Catelyn listened, her hands folded tight in her lap, and felt each strategy like a straw laid atop her shoulders, none heavier than a whisper but together threatening to break her. It was the news from the twins that shattered quiet first. Walder Frey would grant passage, but he demanded one of Robb's sisters as ward and a marriage pact for Edmure or for Robb himself. Should the young wolf care to honor the debts of guest right with more than severed lions? Robb's face hardened to basalt at that. By the next dawn, ravens flew again, bearing refusal. A second head would not sway the Lord of the Crossing, Catelyn knew. Frey's price was calculated in living flesh. The Karstarks rejoiced at Frey's slight. They rode through camp singing songs of lion-slaying and Stark ascendancy. But others watched them with guarded eyes, for victories won in blood could sour faster than curdled milk. When Ser Helman Tallheart broached the matter of southern alliances, Stannis Baratheon still claimed the Iron Throne and Renly's banners were ash. Robb waited a perfect moment before agreeing to treat with the Storm King at Storm's End. That night he dispatched Galbart Glover and Meege Mormont with sealed letters, promising fealty for aid in reclaiming the girls and the North's freedom both. Catelyn signed her name beneath his, though her quill shook. Far across the waters of Blackwater Bay, Davos Seaworth received the letter with wary hands. Stannis sat flanked by Melisandre, whose red eyes gleamed above the parchment like twin coals fanned to life. "A wolf at my gate," the king mused, "and a Lannister skull at his feet." Melisandre saw omens in that skull, shadows that lengthened toward a boy of broken promises and a woman of grieving flame. "Let him come," Stannis said, and the firelight painted hollows in his cheeks. "We shall see whose blood feeds the leeches this time." In Harrenhal's cracked stone godwood, Lord Tywin paced the black-watered pool at midnight, considering paths of wrath. Ravens had flown with news of Jaime's death, but Tywin trusted ravens only so far as their wings carried letters written by other men. He trusted Coin more. So Coin he would loose upon the Riverlands in floods. Gregor Clegane rode first, steel-gray and silent, his helm a snarling hound that reeked of soot and slaughter. Behind him thundered men of Duskendale and ravagers from the Cracklaw who sharpened their knives upon the bones of those they slew. Yet Tywin's greatest weapon was not forged of iron. It was a whisper. Catelyn Stark, Kingslayer in truth, had murdered a hostage taken under parley. Let the realm weigh that sin. Let rivermen who prized guest right like a sacrosanct oath imagine Northmen with lion heads upon tall pikes. Let lords uncertain of Robb's cause recall Ares's pyres and see in his banners the smoky pall of rebellion unbridled. Whispers became letters, letters became outriders galloping to every holdfast between Green Fork and Golden Tooth. In days the talk of taverns shifted, the Kingslayer executed by a grieving woman, his corpse desecrated by Stark bannermen. Never mind that the body lay ash upon the winds, never mind polite pyres and readings of the Seven. Truth was merely whatever tale held Coin at its end. Across restless leagues, Catelyn Stark dreamt of water. She stood barefoot on a long shale strand where the trident met the narrow sea, and each wave withdrew bearing a child's laughter, leaving behind a thin white residue that stung her skin like memory. When she woke, her cheeks were wet and the thin gray light before dawn seeped through her shutters. She rose and dressed without summoning a maid, fastening each clasp with numb fingers. The castle breathed around her, stone sighing, flagpole ropes tapping rhythm, distant voices of sentries bidding one another good morrow. All of Riverrun slept beneath the lull of new victory. But she felt no triumph, only a vast aching hush. Outside, the training yard rang with wooden swords and shouted counts. Arya would have loved that, she thought, and her breath caught. She pictured her perhaps somewhere on the King's Road, hair-cropped, face smudged with dust, reciting the names of those she meant to kill. Now the list had grown by one more Lannister, yet Arya would never cross it. Her mother had done so in her stead. Did that lighten the child's burden, or weigh it further? Maester Vyman approached with scrolls, dispatches from White Harbor, Bear Island, Seaguard. She skimmed each seal, reading not words but the tidings carried in the wax impressions: wolves, mermen, bears, silverfish. Some offered men and grain and saltfish, some asked for timbers to shore crumbling keeps, all expected the young wolf to keep them safe from Tywin's vengeance. One letter smelled faintly of honey and apple, reminding her of harvest feasts long ago when Bran had toddled between trestle tables chasing Summer's Tale. She blinked and the scent became river mud once more. At supper that night, Robb announced their march south toward Storm's End. Edmure objected, fearing Riverrun laid bare, but the Blackfish would hold the fortress with a river's full fury. Stark offered to ride in vanguard, thirsty for Lannister blood should any appear. Only Bolton counseled caution. Storm's End is stone, but Tywin is steel. A wolf that leaves its den may find a lion in its lair when it returns. Robb thanked him and gave the order regardless. Catelyn retired early, yet sleep shunned her. She found herself roaming Riverrun's galleries, trailing fingertips along faded tapestries of winter's past. Snow-clad direwolves leaping among red-leafed godswoods, and Stark brides hand-fasting Tully grooms beside wide rivers bright as quicksilver. In each woven thread she glimpsed her children, alive and laughing, and in every blank seam between panels lived the echo of steel biting bone. Her footsteps carried her at last to the riverside cloister where the ashes of Jaime Lannister had been released to the waters. Moonlight caressed the dark current, turning its eddies into rivulets of cold fire. She knelt, palms skimming the surface. The water was swift and chill, scattering rings at her touch. She whispered a prayer for Ned, then another for Rickon and Arya, Sansa and Bran. When she came to Robb's name, her voice caught and she breathed it only within. A wind rose off the tumblestone, sharp with northward promise, and blew her tears away before they fell. Days lengthened, road dust rising in pale ghosts behind the host of the young wolf. Catelyn rode near the center, flanked by Meege Mormont and Ser Wendell Manderly, whose laughter cracked like thunder each time the bare-side lady needled him about his girth. The men sang as they marched, verses of the north that spoke of ice and hearth and warm ale on long winter nights. Under the bright sun the banners seemed impossibly vivid, gray dire wolf, stone fist, black trout crowned blue, so fierce she fancied the colors themselves might draw blood simply by whipping too close to skin. On the fifth night they camped within sight of the ruins of the Children's Tower, little more than a mossy stump upon a low hill. Ewai that would have made many a Sellsword flinch, the woman's voice was the first true warmth she had felt in days, for all its thorny edge. She wrapped her cloak tight and stepped into the swirling heart of the column, letting the movement of 5,000 bodies carry her forward like a tide. The pace south was deliberate. Robb meant to keep his strength knitted, not strung thin across leagues where Tywin's outriders might nip and harry. Each dusk they formed a massive ring of fire about the wagons, an orange corona visible for miles, daring any foe to come. Catelyn walked the perimeter nightly, pausing by every watchfire, trading a word or a smile, learning which men dreamt of wives, which of plunder, which of quiet earth and seed come spring. She carried Ned's memory like a candle cupped in her palms, shielding the small light from the winds of war, and in the faces of rough spearmen and pikemen she found sparks that answered back. A host was a living thing, she knew. It breathed, it bruised, it starved and bled. She would feed it hope where she could. On the seventh day they forded the Wendwater at a narrowing below Sally Dance. The stream ran cold as meltwater over polished stones, and the horses balked at the bite of it. Robb rode beside her on Grey Wind's lean shadow, offering the hollow comfort of a smile. Lord Umber says the trout are running, he told her, as if talk of fish might mend the worried lines between her brows. She managed a hum of assent. River trout would fill bellies, yes, but trout would not blunt Tywin's sword nor breach Storm's End's thick walls. Grey Wind's hackles lifted suddenly, muzzle wrinkling as he sniffed upriver. From the tree-lean emerged a shaggy-bearded rider bearing a broken spear haft for a standard. His horse foamed at the flanks, the rider's eyes were huge and bloodshot above a beard crusted with dust. Catelyn's heart clenched. Messenger or doom? The man slid clumsily from his saddle before the king in the north and dropped to one knee in the shallows, leather boots filling with brown water. From Lord Hoster Tully's walls, he rasped, voice hoarse as rusted hinges. Ravens failed. Ser Gregor rides. Robb's fingers tightened white upon his saddle pommel. Where? The rider swallowed river water and shuddered. Maester says everywhere. Maidenpool sacked, dairy raised to embers, Blackwater rush choked with corpses. A tremor seized him. He wears the Kingslayer's white cloak nailed to his lance, your grace. A hiss wove through the gathered men, part fear, part fury. Catelyn felt both in equal measure, but she schooled her face to stillness. She could almost see Tywin's hand at work, sliding Gregor's monstrous shadow across the map like a smear of ash. Where wildfire might fail, dread would feast. Robb dismissed the courier to Meage's care and urged Grey wind up the slope to where the captains clustered. Catelyn followed. They crouched amid wind-bent brush as if conspirators. Roose Bolton's pale gaze flitting from face to face. "The mountain means to bleed us chasing phantoms," Bolton murmured. "Ser Gregor strikes and fades. We pursue, he rides where we are not. In a fortnight, the people curse our names louder than theirs." Lord Karstark spat. "Let them curse. Old gods forged the north for colder words than Riverland's tongues can shape." Bolton's mouth twisted. Neither smile nor sneer. "Steel may conquer curses, yet curses rot a cause from within. Bread grows scarce in cursed soil." Catelyn's voice surprised her own ears, clear and unshaken. "We cannot unspill small folk blood, but we might staunch the wound. Send a spearhead east, fast riders, grain wagons behind. Show the river lords we do not leave them to Gregor's mercy. And split our strength," Robb countered softly. "If Stannis proves chary, we could face Tywin alone." "Not alone," Galbart Glover answered. "Blackwood bows in the deep woods. Fry will follow if he sees victory nearer than defeat. And Tallheart holds Seaguard for our return." Karstark knuckled scarred hands. "I will take the vanguard as I begged before. A fortnight's ride, swift and hard. If we find the mountain's back trail, we shall hunt him to hell." Roose Bolton inclined his head, expression unreadable. "Grant Lord Karstark his wish, your grace. It soothes sorrow for sons lost, and his banner flapping eastward may draw Tywin's red-plated vermin after him." A hush fell, broken only by the flap of a torn gray cloak. Robb studied each man, at last letting his gaze rest on Catelyn. She felt his question as keenly as any blade. In her heart she saw Jaime's head tumbling again, and the black paths that had branched from that stroke. At last she inclined her head. "Let the Karstarks ride," she said. "Let the mountain find that wolves still have teeth." So it was done. Karstark's 600 cavalry peeled east at dawn, hooves beating a drum of vengeance across the sodden fields. Catelyn watched their dust plumes until they wavered into the veil of distance. A mother's heart is a strange country, she mused. She wished Rickard Karstark safe, and in the same breath prayed he found the mountain and did not rest until no more breath rattled in his pitiless lungs. That night she slept poorly. Dreams crowded close. Wolves howling on a red sky, fish leaping river shallows only to break upon hidden blades, Jaime's blood steaming against rain-slick stone. She woke before dawn and walked the camp, counting breaths. A guard hailed her with spear but thumped to turf. She answered with a nod, nothing more. Words felt brittle. Later that morning a raven settled upon Robb's gauntlet wrist with uncanny calm. The note it bore was penned in a scholar's careful hand, sealed in dark green wax stamped with the crowned stag of Storm's End. Robb slid it with his dagger, brows knitting as he read. "Stannis grants parole," he told her. "We may treat beneath his walls, but he will speak only with me, and with the Lady Catelyn, and with the gods as witness." She breathed relief soft as silk drawn through fingers. "Then we ride." "We ride," Robb agreed. Gray wind threw back his head and loosed a mournful note, half challenge, half lament. Nearby, Roose Bolton watched, his gloved hands folded. 2 days later the first crenellations of Storm's End crept above the horizon, blue cliffs plunging into a heaving green sea. The fortress hunched like some massive sea lion, walls weather-pocked yet defiant after a dozen centuries of siege. The northern host made camp on a scrub-topped ridge inland, banners furled to simple stripes lest Tywin's scouts tally their numbers. Catelyn rode ahead with Robb and a modest escort, banners stowed, into the salt spray swirl of the castle's shadow. At the wash-clean gates a lone knight in battered green plate awaited them. His tabard hung rain-heavy, embroidered with the fiery heart of Lawler, Stannis' new sigil since Melisandre's arrival. "I am Ser Gaiard Morrigan," he announced. "By leave of his grace the king, you will disarm." His stare lingered on Grey Wind's yellow eyes. The beast remains without. Robb gloved his brother wolf's muzzle in quiet promise and turned over his sword. Catelyn offered her dirk hilt first. Ser Gaiard handed the weapons to a squire and led them beneath the portcullis, hoofbeats echoing like drums in a cavern. Within the yard, Storm's End bustled, armorers hammering at rivets, carts unloading sacks of grain, red priests murmuring at braziers that coughed pale flame despite the wind's wet slap. None cheered, but all stared, and not without curiosity. Many here had heard of the Kingslayer's fate. Melisandre received them in a chapel stripped of the Seven Idols. The air smelled of smoke and strange spice. Tall black candles burned with tips of weeping red, shadows writhed upon the bare stone walls in shapes that seemed to coil and shatter, then recoil anew. The Red Woman bowed a fraction. The Lord of Light welcomes travelers, though every road we walk is forged of choices already made. Robb frowned warily. My road seeks alliance, my lady. Is Stannis Baratheon king enough to walk beside a wolf? Melisandre's eyes glimmered. Kings are mortal. Fire is eternal. Bend your knee to flame and shadow, and light shall devour the darkness cast by lions. Catelyn touched Robb's sleeve. We will parley with King Stannis, she said with quiet steel. Not with riddles. Melisandre gestured to a heavy oak door banded in iron. The king awaits beyond. May the night be gracious. She smiled, whether benediction or warning Catelyn could not tell. Stannis sat alone within a long hall open to the sea, its far shutters thrown wide so wind keened through like a wounded pipe. No tapestries softened the stone, only a single great table dominated the chamber, its surface carved and painted in the likeness of Westeros. Catelyn had heard of it, Aegon's Fury, Dragonstone's heirloom carried south. Stannis stood at the narrow sea's painted edge, fingertips resting where storm's end jutted. He looked lean, his face a study in flint and exhausted fury. At Robb's approach he nodded, curt. You bring a direwolf to my gates and banners of revolt in your packs. Why should I open to either? Robb met flint with granite. Because you need the North as we need an ally not sworn to lions. And because the true war is against the Lannisters, not between wolves and stags. Stannis' mouth twitched. The true war is ever for the realm's soul. The boy Joffrey squats on a throne forged by treason. My claim is lawful. Catelyn finished when his voice grated into silence. My husband believed so, yet lawful claim does not feed the riverlands nor free my daughters. Wolves do not bend knee lightly, but we will stand beside those who stand against the lions. Stannis' gaze flicked to her, measuring, unkind. Eddard Stark acted blindly and lost his head. Will his widow gamble the heads of her sons? The words sliced, but Catelyn did not flinch. My sons were gambled the moment Joffrey drew a sword. We bargain now to ensure they retain more than the toss of chance. Behind Stannis, Davos Seaworth materialized like a shadow of calm seas, salt-stiff cloak wrapped tight. Sire, he murmured, the realm bleeds. Harvest rots unscythed in the reach. Ironborn raid the Cape of Eagles. Clegane sends smoke by the bale. Allies, not corpses, win wars. Stannis exhaled, a sound equal parts gust and growl. The Red Woman shows me paths lit in blood. Yet even blood must flow within living veins for the sword arm to rise. Very well. He tapped the map table once. I will accept the fealty of the young wolf and his lords. In return I swear to aid his cause. By steel, by ship, by law. We bring low the lions, free the wolf maidens, and divide the realm when the work is done. Robb's jaw set. The North will be independent. The North will be recognized sovereign. Stannis allowed. So shall the trident, should House Tully wish it. He shrugged, iron in the motion. If that price wins me a clean victory, I pay it. Catelyn breathed, and the hall felt vast beneath that single sigh. Yet victory never tasted so sharp as the knowledge of what must follow. Tywin will not meekly watch banners unite, she said. He will strike hard and cruel, as he did with Ser Gregor. If we show a joint front, he may panic. And a panicked lion claws deepest. Stannis nodded. Then we bleed him before the claws find purchase. Word of our pact rides at dawn. Ships depart within days. The fiery heart and the dire wolf shall stand hearth to hearth. His fingers whitened on the carved stormlands. Robb gave good words, proofed in solemn vows. Catelyn found herself staring at the candlelit shadows dancing on the bare walls, wondering if one might twist into Ned's shape. Broad shoulders, quiet smile. None did. When they withdrew, Melisandre trailed them to the yard. She leaned upon a carven staff, rubies glowing in the night wind's gusts. The night is long, she said. Longer still for those who shut their eyes to what moves in it. Winter rides behind the lion's roar. Her laugh was soft as falling ash. Pray that your gods of snow and river remember how to love their children, Lady Catelyn. The one true God counts no favorites. Catelyn tasted copper on her tongue and realized she had bitten her lip. I need no red god's love, she murmured. Only my family's lives. Blood paints the path to every salvation, Melisandre replied, voice nearly lost beneath the surf. Choose whose? Outside Storm's End, Robb found gray wind pacing, hackles high, spinning tight circles as though scents clung to the very air. The wolf fell into step the instant Robb swung astride his horse, as though nothing in the world could keep them apart. Catelyn watched boy and beast move together and felt a stab of fierce, irrational dread. Wolves mated for life, old Nan had said once. Break the bond, break the soul. Back in camp, the captains gathered round a fire burning driftwood that hissed and spat. The sea wind had shifted, sparks twirled upward like desperate fireflies. Edmure's letter awaited, Fry had not yet moved. Lord Walder demanded fresh hostages, 2 Freys to be wed into stalwart houses, a Riverlord's seat for a grandson. Robb sighed and for a moment looked every inch the boy he still was, shoulders bowed by decades of old men's greed. Roose Bolton spoke almost kindly. Pay the toll? Bridges, like tempers, grow dearer the longer they are denied. His gloved fingers toyed with the mouth of his wine cup. Silver buys fealty, blood buys obedience, but hostages buy time. He sipped. Time is wrath's currency. Lord Galbart snorted. If you'd host your daughter in Frey's bed, be my guest. I'd sooner bet a weirwood. Bolton's pale eyes flicked, lids half-lowered. A tree's kiss is cold. A Frey's is colder, yet kills slower. Catelyn rose before tempers lit tinder. We have allies now who value victory over insult, she said. Stannis will land his strength at Driftmark, perhaps further south. The lion will rave. Let Fry choose whether his wet river stones lie beneath wolf paws or lion claws. He will open. Midge Mormont thumped her tankard. Aye, and if he doesn't, we feed him to the river. That image lingered as she lay beneath her sewn-together furs that night. Lord Walder swept away like a bit of flotsam, river choking his final croak. She drifted into a half-sleep where every ripple became a whisper. When the whispers shaped Ned's name, she startled awake, heart hammering in the hush. The tent sagged around her, canvas sighing with each gust, and for a heartbeat she feared Melisandre's shadows had crept within. But there was only darkness and the murmur of far-off sentries. The raven came before dawn. It bore a black ribbon, sign of urgent tidings. Maester Vyman's terse script conveyed 2 blows. Balon Greyjoy had set sails along the western coast, and Ramsay Snow had routed Ser Roderick Castle in a surprise assault upon Winterfell. The castle burned. Bran and Rickon were unaccounted for. The paper fell from her fingers like a severed pulse. She heard her own voice keening, distant as though torn from some other throat. Robb read the note, once, twice, face leached of color. The tent erupted, Edmure cursing, Karstark slamming fist to table. But Catelyn saw none of it. Only the smear of ink where Maester Vyman's hand had trembled writing lost. She rose, knees wooden, and walked out into gray early light. Wind tugged her hair, pulling strands free. Somewhere an axe thudded, splitting kindling. Horses stamped, restless. Life persisted while her heart fissured. She turned toward the north, toward a horizon hidden beyond 1,000 bendings of the earth, and prayed. Not to R'hllor, not to the Seven, but to the old gods who kept silent vigil in leaf and stone. Bring my boys home. Take all else but not them. Behind her, Robb's boots approached. He halted at her shoulder. Mother. Only that. The word carried more weight than crowns. She reached for him and found his sleeve damp with sea mist. They stood thus while the sun dragged itself up a sky as brittle as untempered steel. When at last they re-entered the command tent, Roose Bolton was already speaking. Ironborn strike upon the west, Bolton men secure the dread fort. The north bleeds. I will ride with whatever strength we can spare to take back Winterfell and hunt this bastard to ground. Robb's voice was hoarse. My place is in the north. He looked to his captains, pleading without shame. My brothers may be hiding, hunted. Bran cannot run. Rickon is but a boy. Galbart Glover clasped the king's forearm. Then ride, your grace. The north remembers its lords. I will command in your stead here, see the pact with Stannis sealed in blood if need be. But Catelyn saw how Robb's eyes flitted to the map's southern reaches, to Sansa's cage and Arya's perilous unknown. We risk the whole cause, he whispered. Break our lines, Tywin marches unopposed. Sansa, Arya. They are hostages, Catelyn said. Holdfasts of our loyalty, so the lion believes. Yet loyalty is a blade that cuts 2 throats. We may yield them to save our sons, or we may win all children's freedom at once. Choose, Robb, but choose as a king, not a brother alone." Bolton's pale smile returned. "Permit me, your grace. I ride swift. My men know northern snows, northern shadows. In the Bastard's Hall I learned every stone's betrayal. Let me take 500, no more. Winterfell returns to you intact or not at all." He bowed slightly. "The night is long. I will fill it with dread for our foes." Karstark growled, "Bolton's ways are darker than wolf or man." But effective, Roose finished softly. The smile did not reach his eyes. In the end they agreed. Bolton would ride, Robb would remain to push the southern pincer lest their labor die stillborn. Catelyn watched the decision take shape like frost across a pond, silent but irrevocable. She did not trust Bolton, few did, but she trusted the depth of his ambition, and ambition could sometimes serve where faith failed. Bolton departed before the sun topped its first zenith, his standard pale pink man flayed on X-shaped cross, snapping behind him in the salt wind. Catelyn watched until the banner dwindled, uneasy. That evening a second messenger arrived beneath a white flag. Ser Cleos Fry, cousin to Robb through Lady Catelyn's Tully line, escorted by 6 knights. He brought terms from King's Landing, penned in Tyrion Lannister's tidy hand. For the return of Jane Westerling, hostage of war, and 38 captives taken on the Green Fork, the crown offered Sansa Stark back uninjured, 100,000 golden dragons in recompense for Ned Stark's losses, and a pardon for all Riverlords not named Tully. Sansa's letter accompanied, her neat script tremulous at edges. "Mother, do what is wise," it pleaded. "Let the fighting end." Catelyn's throat closed. Tyrion's cunning struck deep, the Kingslayer's head for a single girl, weighed in gold and false mercy. She felt Robb's gaze on her and braced to meet it. "We cannot," she said, voice low. "We dare not. Sansa is bait." Jaime's death left them one hostage fewer. They would seize the north by her skin. Robb nodded, though anguish shadowed his eyes. "We refuse," he told Ser Cleos. "But we will answer in writing." He turned to Catelyn. "You know her heart. Tell her the truth, that we fight to bring her home whole, not half-sold to buy a moment's peace." Cleos bowed, understanding little, and withdrew. Outside, thunder rolled across the sea. Rain hammered canvas moments later. The young wolf's camp lit braziers to push back darkness. Catelyn wrote by sputtering candle. She told Sansa what comfort she could, of Bran's courage, of Robb's strength, of Arya's unbowed spirit somewhere in the wild, and swore they would come for her, all of them together. She signed, "Your loving mother," and wept as the ink dried crookedly where tears had fallen. When she emerged, Midge Mormont waited, soaked head to toe, face streaked where rain had carved paths through grime. "Here," the Bear Island lady said gruffly, thrusting a skin of fiery northern spirit into her hands. "Drink. The sea howls tonight. Let it howl. Wolves do not flinch at wind." Catelyn drank. The liquor burned like dawn in winter lungs, fierce enough to sharpen grief into something almost bearable. She found herself laughing, low and ragged, and Midge joined her, slapping her back so hard she coughed. In that moment they were 2 women, mothers both, standing against storms with only the thin armor of stubborn hearts. Robb called council again at midnight. News from Stannis had come. Lord Celtigar brought 60 ships. The Red Wine fleet dared not yet move for fear of Tywin's spies. But Melisandre prophesied victory upon the Blackwater tides. Victory written in a storm of swords and tongues of fire. Robb tapped the painted map where King's Landing crouched. "We strike here," he said. "Stannis by sea, our host by river road. A hammer and anvil. When we meet, the lion breaks." Galbart Glover rubbed his beard. "If he does not strike first, then we bleed," Robb answered. "But we bleed together." His eyes met Catelyn's. "Or not at all." She nodded. She had taught him those words when he first picked up a wooden sword. A pack survives only as one. Alone, a wolf is prey. Dawn bled across the waves like bruised peach. The northern host broke camp in silence save for gulls and the creak of wagon wheels. News of Winterfell's fall had spread, choking songs in throats, but forging something harder in its place. Men marched with eyes fixed forward, jaws set. Gray wind stalked the column's flanks, occasionally lifting his muzzle to the breeze as though scenting home. Catelyn rode near Robb, silence comfortable between them. When the first green tongues of the King's Road rose to meet their wheels, she glanced back once more at the sea. Storm's End loomed gray in distance, Melisandre's red banners specks of blood on stone. Alliances forged of necessity felt fragile as frost. Yet frost sharpened blades. She turned her horse inland. Every hoofbeat carried dust of faraway fields. And with each step she whispered Bran, Rickon. Somewhere in the north 2 boys breathed, if the gods were merciful. Somewhere in the capital, a girl wrote letters with veins full of fear and iron. Somewhere a girl with water dancers' feet walked roads no map penned. And somewhere the bones of Jaime Lannister lay mingled with river silt, a ghostly grin washed clean by currents, nameless fish stripping the last scraps of pride from white bone. Justice, she had called it. Vengeance, her foes would say. Both were true, neither enough. The road stretched ahead, a long gray ribbon winding between hedges of possibility. Upon that narrow path rode a mother's hopes, a son's crown, a kingdom's fate, balanced, perhaps forever, on the edge of a sword swung in rain-soaked anger. Catelyn Stark bent low in her saddle as the wind rose and rode on. The rain that tracked the host north and south finally broke, replaced by an oppressive, hard blue sky that made every helm glare and every shield feel twice its weight. Catelyn Stark tasted dust where yesterday there had been salt. The change in wind carried the faint, sour perfume of trampled wheat and summer heat rotting roadside carrion. Storm's End dwindled behind them, no more than a gray smudge on a distant cliff, but the pact it represented rode beside her in every clank of mail and clatter of hooves. When the banners snapped in the new sun, she counted 2 hosts braided. Direwolf and Fiery Heart, Trout and Crown Stag, moving in one long serpent toward the Blackwater. Robb seldom left the van now. He rode hard with Galbart Glover and Ser Wendell Manderly, gray wind padding leagues ahead as living scout. Sometimes at dusk the great wolf returned streaked in someone else's blood, hare, stag, perhaps some lone outrider foolhardy enough to spy too close, and Robb would kneel, fingers buried in the thick ruff as if reading omens in the matted fur. Catelyn watched the ritual with a mother's ache. He was a man grown and a king besides, yet still the boy who had begged for a pup the day they found the dead dire wolf in the snow beneath the beheading tree. They marched 5 days without seeing an enemy. On the 6th the trail of smoke-blackened farmsteads appeared beyond the rise. The mountains work, scouts said, barns torched, grain cut down before ripening, wells fouled with offal. Catelyn picked her way through the ruin at midday while smiths dragged broken plows from the ash and buried them in shallow cairns, the only grave stone enough for a poor man's tools. A single cedar cradle lay overturned near a gutted cottage, scorched but unburned, as though some merciful hand had snatched out the child in time. She turned it upright, brushing charred splinters from its rim, and thought of Bran's first nights, how he had kicked and wailed until she sang the maiden fair 4 times through. The memory struck so keen she gasped. Midge Mormont found her there and said nothing, only lifted the cradle in one broad arm and carried it to the supply cart. Someone, somewhere, will need it, the Bear Island lady grunted. Catelyn nodded, unable to speak. That evening thunderheads massed in the west, towering anvils that blotted sunset gold. Lightning rippled inside those dark bellies, silent for now. Robb ordered camp made beneath a line of low limestone bluffs half a mile off the King's Road, where tumbleweed and sheep bones littered the gullies. The ground was poor for stakes but offered scant approach for cavalry, so the men muttered little and unpacked without complaint. At second watch the sky cracked open, rain fell in hammered sheets, drumming the tents like an army of fists. Catelyn lay awake listening to it, counting between flash and roar. She always lost track around 30, drifting into uneasy slumber where Ned's shade paced battlements slick with green wildfire. At dawn the world steamed, earth fragrant with wet clay. Ravens found the camp bearing 2 notes. The first came from Lord Hoster's own maester. Ser Gregor and his marauders had failed to breach Seaguard's hastily shored walls but had burned half the fleet in harbor before retreating. The second raven brought darker tidings from the east. Karstark's outriders had engaged the mountain at Lord Harroway's town. The skirmish cost 36 northern lives and 2 score of Riverlanders. Gregor's force slipped away into the God's Eye reeds. But Karstark took trophies, helmets crushed flat as tankards, a wagon of severed hands still clutching looted coin, and vowed he would not stop until Gregor's head adorned his bridle. Robb read the letter twice, mouth set in a grim line. Justice, he told Catelyn, though neither of them missed how thin the word sounded set beside such butchery. 2 days later they reached Sow's Horn, a broad sweep of meadowland bisected by the Mander tributary. There they joined a second column. Stormlords flying the Penrose Griffin and the Estermont Turtle, Crownlanders bearing Crackclaw sigils, and a half-mounted levy of marchmen hardened by 3 years of raider skirmishes. Stannis' commanders melded with Robb's captains like coral-sized stones poured into a single sling pouch, an uneasy fit but lethal if loosed together. Ser Davos Seaworth served as interpreter where the old rivalries flared hottest. To Glover's grumble that Stormlanders carried too little grain, Davos answered with dry humor about Northman appetites. To Estermont's snide remark that wolves piss on every tree they pass, Davos tapped the crusted scars where fingers were gone and said only, "Some debts we carry with honor, M-Lord. Others we pay in kind." That quiet rebuke settled more arguments than a dozen swords. Plans formed around smoky campfires. Robb and Stannis would march converging lines toward Maidenpool, secure that harbor, then swing west along the Blackwater's north bank while Stannis' fleet attacked from the mouth. If Tyrion Lannister hurled wildfire upon the river, as whisperers claimed, the embankment approach would become a corridor of flame, but wildfire burned as readily against city walls as against ships, and Stannis counted on that chaos. Robb's wolves mustered siege towers from felled pines and scavenged cart axles, crude but towering. Stormlords produced massive stone throwers cannibalized from Storm's End's own ruins. Catelyn traced her finger along the map, imagining green fire spewing from bronze jaws, flaring against dark water and gilded brick. In her mind's eye she saw Ned's skull bleaching in a crow-pecked cage above the Red Keep gate. If wildfire must cleanse, let it scorch that iron perch first. The host broke camp before sunrise. The King's Road bent inland. Robb's army left it, hacking a fresh track through fallow fields where barley once grew. Catelyn rode beside Davos for a time, and the smuggler knight spoke of sons. One sailed in the fleet under Ser Imry Florent, one prayed nightly with the Red Woman, another fretted over wind charts and cargo stowage. "Good boys," Davos said. "I'd see them live in a calmer world than I did." His eyes flicked to her. "I reckon you'd say the same." She swallowed the word yes like a stone. Ahead, riders returned with dust devils at their heels, Lannister scouts, 100, routed but not slain. Robb sent Meege and Ser Wendell in pursuit. They came back at dusk dragging 3 prisoners and a crimson banner soaked nearly black. One man, wounded gut deep, gasped that Ser Imry's vanguard fleet had sighted sails painted green and gold, Tyrell colors. Another spat that half the Reach marched north behind Mace Tyrell's Rose, sworn now to Joffrey in exchange for a Roseanne Lyon marriage pact. The third prisoner bit off his own tongue before answering and died laughing red froth. News spread like spark through flax. Some men cheered a divided foe might falter, others cursed. A city defended by both Lion and Rose meant thicker walls of steel to breach. That night Catelyn visited the healer's pavilion, where triage cots overflowed with flux sufferers and men felled by summer fevers nursed in stagnant pools. She carried a sack of dried orange rinds soaked 2 days in vinegar, an old Winterfell remedy for wheezing cough. The healer, a Tyroshi with half-healed maester's chain, blinked grateful surprise. While Catelyn rinsed cloths in warmed wine, a young soldier grasped her wrist and begged her to write a letter for him. His fingers shook, she smelled death's chill climbing his skin. By guttering tallow she penned, under his whispered guidance, a note to Lisa of Fairmarket promising he would return by harvest with coin enough to marry her. His name, he said, was Tom, but the healer called him Edric. Soldiers often borrowed names. When the quill scratched its last, his head lolled sideways, eyes fixed on some distant banner no hand would ever raise again. Catelyn folded the parchment, sealed it with wax, and tucked it beneath his stiff fingers. She left the pavilion silent and found Davos waiting. He offered no words, only a handkerchief smelling faintly of salt and tar. She did not realize she'd been crying until she felt the cloth. 2 dawns later the combined host topped a ridge overlooking the smoking ruin of Sousehorn's southern farms. Beyond, the Mummers Ford glittered like a broken mirror. Robb called halt under a twisted chestnut where ravens perched 3 to a branch, croaking. Scouts reported enemy sign on both banks, Tyrell outriders holding the east approach, Lannister shields massing at a ruined septri. Robb's war council convened on the slope, men crouched around the map weighted with pitted stones. Stannis pointed with his gauntlet finger, send a feint south to draw the Rose away, then hammer the lions with everything, race to the ford before sunset. Roiling argument followed. Lord Tarth urged caution, Tyrell spears could skewer cavalry in the shallows. Ser Wendell countered that Mandoli oarsmen could punt supply scows up the tributary while the main host pressed. Galbart Glover swore the dire wolves would not break stride for flowers. Catelyn listened, weighing each voice. At last she spoke, a night crossing upstream, far from prying scouts, with Stormlanders holding torches low beneath barrel covers to guide the lead companies. Robb caught her eye, nodded once, and the council's roar quieted. Thus the army rode north of the ford under cover of dusk, torches hooted. Catelyn's heart pounded every time the wind shifted, fearing the torch smoke would betray them. Yet the night blessed them, no breeze, only humid stillness and the low murmur of frogs unseen. They halted where willow boughs drooped over lazy black water. Stormlanders slid into the shallows first, torches dim and hooted beneath clay jars with air holes punched. They waded waist-deep, planting slacklines for the horses, then came the Northmen, packs held over heads, blades strapped in oilskin. Catelyn crossed on foot, gripping the rope, cold river curling past thighs. Somewhere down current a trout leapt, silver flash vanishing in starlight. When she stumbled on a slick stone, Davos steadied her with calloused hands. For times she whispered silent thanks to the old gods, though she knew in these parts the faith still held more septons than heart trees. By dawn they stood on the eastern bank while Tyrell outriders still drowsed in picket tents 2 miles south. Robb unleashed Meege Mormont's she-bears and the flank of Hornwood riders. They swept down upon the sleeping camp with bone-rattling war horns, axes hewing through silk pavilion ropes. The Tyrell men scattered in half-buckled breastplates, daisies trampled under boot and hoof. Fires broke in the dry grass, smoke curled skyward, a banner of sudden retribution. When scattering turned to rally, it was already too late. Stannis' columns stormed the ford from the west, smashing Lannister shield walls with seasoned discipline. Catelyn watched from the rise as Galbart's pikemen locked rank 5 deep. Arrows hissed overhead, some striking Tyrell horses trying to regroup, others embedding in red lacquer shields that splintered under bludgeon blows. The clash rang like smithies at midsummer, metal on metal without respite. At midday Robb's flank broke the Septri wall with a crude ram fashioned from an uprooted cedar. Inside, Lannister archers tried to make a last stand among crumbling statues of the maiden and father, but stone dust and panic blinded them. When gray winds streaked through a shattered arch with jaws dripping, the defense folded. By sunset the field lay thick with trampled flowers and torn banners. Robb's men tended their wounded first. The dead, only once living throats had quit screaming. Catelyn moved among the moaning forms carrying boiled wool and wet sand to cauterize arrow wounds. At one heap she found a boy no older than Bran, Tyrell device half sewn on a too large gambeson, his hand clenched around a brass cloak brooch shaped like a rose thorn. She pried the fingers open, whispered a prayer, and set the brooch on his chest, flat. A healer's assistant asked if he was kin to her. No, she said, voice raw. But someone will look for him. Stannis arrived late, armor streaked with gore, helm carried under arm. He regarded the carnage with bleak satisfaction. This was but the first wall, he told Robb. Walls grow thicker farther in. Robb thanked him with weary formality. Their victory had cost 300 wolves and nearly as many stags. Tyrell and Lannister losses doubled that. Yet Maidenpool had fallen and its harbor lay open. The fleet could resupply, siege engines could be floated upriver piecemeal and rebuilt beneath King's Landing's shadow. Morale smoldered hot. Men sang rough songs beside funeral pyres, celebrating comrades by name. Catelyn stood a long time by the brightest pyre, transfixed by how sparks leapt free only to vanish in the dark. A brief flare and nothing more. Ravens left at dawn. One to the Karstark vanguard, urging caution. One to Riverrun, relaying triumph. 2 to the twins, sweetened with fresh promises of lordships for Frey grandsons. Catelyn penned another to White Harbor, requesting more salt fish now that Maidenpool's docks lay safe. She signed her name so often her wrist cramped. At midday a final message arrived from Roose Bolton. Lines slanted like spider legs. Dreadfort secure. Bastard stripped, Winterfell bare, holding hostages of no account. Will reconnoiter Moat Cailin whilst bastard hunted. Expect results. Bolton's seal, a flayed man, pressed deep enough to cut the parchment. 2 nights later, scouts captured a courier fleeing west bearing Tyrion Lannister's hand seal. Under torch glare he confessed. Wildfire stockpiled in the city's cellars, barrels enough to turn the Blackwater into a glowing grave. Stannis convened council at once. Red woman present. Her eyes shone as if the secret pleased her. Fire is a pure servant, she said. Unfetter and it devours all masters. Davos argued that wildfire was treacherous, a dragon you lit only at your own peril. Robb demanded alternatives. Catelyn, silent in the corner, remembered Bran's tale of the dragon skulls beneath the Red Keep, how their empty sockets seemed to track one's steps. She pictured those ancient jaws now stuffed with Tyrion's green infernos, waiting to belch cataclysm. Plans shifted. Stannis would strike at night on a moonless tide, using narrow-hulled longships to sweep wildfire casks out on chains before setting them ablaze downstream of the Lion's Gate. Robb's forces would dig zigzag trenches and flooding dikes along the north riverbank, channeling any runoff into deadwater pools. If wildfire spilled, it would find only carefully caged earth. Catelyn spent one long evening with a Septon scribe drafting proclamations promising safe haven to small folk who fled the city beforehand. She knew most would not believe, but the words mattered. She had been small folk once, in all but name, child of a river lord overshadowed by grander seats. At Maidenpool's Sept she prayed beside an iron lamp tree. The mother's statue lay toppled, arms broken, face missing. Even faceless, the figure offered more comfort than Melisandre's ruby-pulse theology. Catelyn lit 3 candles, one for Bran, one for Rickon, one for Sansa. She wanted to light a 4th for Arya but could not bear the thought that the flame might flicker at some precise moment far away if Arya's heart stopped. So she carried that hope unlit, tucked under ribs. Robb joined her after the last candle guttered low. He knelt stiffly. She noticed how his mail left ridges on his knees now, calluses of war. "I think Father would have hated this," he whispered. She stroked his hair. The boy in him still felt that touch. "Ned hated needless war," she said. "But he would swing the sword when justice failed. He taught you the hardest truth. Sometimes mercy is a slower death." "Is that what we give King's Landing?" he asked. "We give them a chance to stop," she said. "If they refuse, we give them fire. Let that choice be theirs." He nodded, but his eyes remained on the cracked marble where the mother's face had once gazed. She wondered whether he saw Sansa's features there, or maybe his own when he was still small enough to hide behind her skirts. The host moved at dawn, leaving Maidenpool in hands of a mixed garrison sworn to feed refugees and keep order. As they marched, the coastline fell away to Mars. Then grit-flat tidal plain. The salt smell grew heavy. Gulls wheeled overhead, shrieking like wounded things. The Blackwater Road rose on packed shell and gravel atop ancient dikes. To the south the river shimmered, green in midday, ugly and slick. Ahead, 2 squat watchtowers marked the outwall of King's Landing's greater fields. Abandoned now except by a few starving pigs rooting in what had once been melon rows. Robb ordered no drums, no horns. Silence marched with them. Under that hush, Catelyn heard the city before she saw it. A distant rumble, half ocean surf, half forge roar. When they topped the last hill, King's Landing lay splayed like a dull jewel. The walls looked smaller than she remembered from tales, but the water glittered snake green under sun, and the Red Keep perched high and cruel above slanted roofs. Catelyn thought of Ned again, how his bones might yet rest somewhere in that cruel mass of stone. She swallowed bitterness dry. Stannis' fleet waited beyond the mouth, black sails furled, oars shipped. At dusk their lantern codes flashed upriver, ready. On shore, sappers drove stakes marking trench lines while teams of Stormlanders dug furrows. Northmen hauled wicker gabions stuffed with wet loam to line the channels. By moonrise, a humped landscape of earthworks had taken shape. Catelyn moved among the laborers with waterskins, repeating Robb's oath that no man would be left to burn. She recognized fear in their faces, but something else too, pride, perhaps, at building a bulwark against sorcery. At midnight a hush thicker than any fog settled. The river seemed to hold its breath. Torches on the walls flickered. From here they were tiny fireflies. Then a single boom carried across water, the warhorn of Dragonstone, deep, mournful. 3 pulses answered from the fleet, and black shapes slid forward, longships towing chains dripping firefly sparks where cold iron scraped the water. Each chain linked wooden rafts stacked with ash-soaked cedar. Barrels of wildfire bobbed atop like obscene fruit. Rowers dipped blades in unison, silent. On shore, the host crouched behind Gabion walls, breath frosting in night air despite summer heat. The Red Woman stood upon a makeshift dais by the trench lines, arms raised. Her ruby thong glowed fitful heartbeats. In the city a bell clanged, frantic. Arrows whickered downriver, too short. Catapults hurled jars that shattered against water, coughing green flares that hissed but did not catch. Tyrion had misjudged the range or the wind, Catelyn thought, or perhaps the gods simply turned their faces. When the first raft reached the Lion Gate, torchbearers on the longship decks hurled faggots bound with pitch onto the piled cedar. Flame leapt red, then green high as masts. A plume of smoke billowed, lit from within like an emerald storm cloud. The fire kissed stone battlements. Guards along the parapet disappeared in incandescent spray. More rafts followed, each touched with flame. Within moments the river's center channel burned bank to bank, a seething corridor of molten emerald. But Robb's dikes held, the north bank trenches funneled spillover into lagoons that boiled hissing but did not overtop. The city side drank the worst of it, wood wharves ignited, docked cogs flared like paper lanterns, and a curtain wall near the fish market sagged, mortar melting to slag. Robb gave the signal. Hornwood archers loosed hundreds of burning shafts inland on high arcs. They landed in granaries and hastily erected siege sheds along the inner walls. Tyrion's own forward works now turned to kindling. As orange joined green, a hue no painter could name rippled across the smoke. Through that hell-road gray wind, Catelyn saw him only briefly, a gray blur vaulting the charred palisade, vanishing into green light. Moments later, screams rose from the gatehouse. Then Robb spurred his vanguard. Bran's old palfrey could never match that speed, she thought absurdly, then banished the thought as her own mount followed the press. They pounded up the bank, through gaps in the burning palisade where heat seared eyebrows to singe. The clamor ahead drowned all thought, steel on steel, the thunder of hooves crossing cobble. She glimpsed Robb at the fore, shield striped by ash, sword dripping wildfire residue that hissed where it landed on stone. Inside the outer district chaos reigned. Small folk fled every which way, some clutching bundles, others children, one man a single jug of sour wine. Robb's banner companies formed wedges, driving for the gate of the gods while Stormlanders cleared cross streets. Catelyn rode with a reserve of Tully spearmen protecting supply carts loaded with water barrels, vinegar cloths, and bandages. Every face she passed looked older than its years, lined by flame shadow and terror. Some reached for her cloak, crying. She could only whisper, "Get beyond the walls. Follow the trout banners." And pray they heard. At the city's second wall, they met real resistance. Gold cloaks under Ser Jacelyn Bywater. Pikes braced across the avenue. Behind them churned a handful of elegantly armored Tyrell knights who had reached the city ahead of Mace's main host. Catelyn watched one green-plumed rider spur forward shouting parley. A cut purse lunged from a doorway and dragged him down, dagger flashing. By the time the gold cloaks reached him, the thief had vanished into smoke with the man's coin. Bywater shouted for order, but his men looked as frightened of the mob at their backs as of the wolves advancing. Arrows decided the matter. Archers atop a stable roof feathered the pikes. Tully spears surged. Robb's voice rang over the clash. A single word, yield. Some did, others died. Ser Bywater threw down his helm and knelt. Catelyn saw in his eyes a weary relief. One king or another, he said, so long as the city stands. Beyond, the wide market square stank of spilled hay and broken pottery, but its paving stones gave open ground for the siege towers. Stormlanders unlashed theirs, heaving with ropes. Catelyn dismounted to help ballast a winch. Sweat stung her cut lip, but she hauled until the big oak timbers creaked upright. When the tower's crow's nest battered against the inner wall, horn blasts signaled breach. Night blurred into dawn. Somewhere in those hours, Tywin Lannister's relief host reached the King's Road only to find Maidenpool's garrison harrying his baggage train. Reports arrived scattered, Mace Tyrell's vanguard not yet sighted, the mountain last seen doubling back toward the Gold Road after clashing with Karstark again near Derry. The realm's pieces slid across the board faster than any maester's raven could track. At sunrise the Red Keep capitulated. No heroic stand, no queen flinging herself from crenellation, only the rasp of rusty hinges as Janos Slint opened the King's Gate under white flag. Robb's honor guard climbed the long switchback to Maegor's holdfast. Catelyn followed, half in disbelief. The marble steps were slick with dew and soot. At each landing she remembered the tales of Mad King Aerys burning lords alive. Now the halls smelled only of damp stone and some sharp perfume that might have been lingering fear. At the throne room doors, Robb bid her wait. She watched him enter, flanked by gray wind, both dust-black and blood-flecked, and thought she might faint from pride and dread in equal measure. She did not see the surrender. She heard it, Joffrey's high-pitched wail, Cersei's scream curdled into hate, Tyrion's bitter laughter ending in coughs. When Robb emerged, crownless but unbowed, he carried Sansa by the hand. The girl's gray gown was torn, hair tangled, but her spine remained straight. Catelyn gathered her daughter in arms that trembled. Sansa shook silently for a moment, then whispered Arya was here. Tyrion let her run. Her voice cracked on run. Catelyn kissed her brow, tasting soot and salt. Down in the yard, wildfire still burned in patches, though the worst had guttered into greasy smoke. Stannis dismounted to survey ruins like a tax assessor valuing charred property. When he saw Catelyn with Sansa, he inclined his head. The first pledge kept, he allowed. Robb clasped his hand wrist to wrist. Hollow-eyed men who had slaughtered one another hours before now exchanged weary nods, victors, though victory felt ragged. That evening ravens flew in all directions. One bore a sealed scroll addressed to His Majesty Robert Stark, King in the North and Triton. Another flew to Riverrun bearing 4 words only, daughter found. Hold faith. A third winged west with dour tidings for Tywin. His grandson's crown lay dashed at a wolf's feet, his daughter confined to chambers under Stormlander watch, his city shorn of gold and glory alike. War remained, but it shifted ground. Catelyn stood atop the city walls at dusk, watching the Blackwater whisper around cooling banks of green ash. Some embers still glowed amid riverweed, sparks winking out one by one. She thought of Jaime's skull riding beneath those waters toward the sea and wondered whether vengeance ever truly washed clean. Behind her, the city groaned and sparked, trying to remember how to breathe without terror. Ahead lay the North's reckoning, Winterfell's smoking ruin or salvation, Bran's quiet courage, Rickon's wild squalls of stubborn life. And somewhere between, Arya danced unseen, sharp as the thin edge of hope. Robb joined her, arm heavy across her shoulders. Below, gray wind prowled the parapet shadows. The air smelled of burnt pitch and distant lemon cakes. Someone, somewhere, had begun baking again. Mother, Robb said softly, was the price too steep? She leaned into him and considered the question, watchfires winking like new stars along the river curve. Ask me when Winterfell stands whole and your sisters laugh together, she answered. Ask me when snow falls quiet on graves that need no new stones. Until then, the tally's not complete. Robb nodded and said nothing more. Night fell. Torches burned on the walls, bright points against lingering smoke. In their wavering light, Catelyn Stark lifted her face to the cooling wind and whispered the names of her children, one by one, like prayer beads sliding through trembling fingers, knowing some might answer in dream, some in flesh, and some only in memory, yet vowing to keep whispering until every name found its home. Smoke rolled on the morning tide, drifting beneath the Red Keep's ramparts like a ragged cloak, but already King's Landing breathed again. By some miracle the wells ran clear despite wildfire's taint, and bakers set sponge to rise on hearthstones scoured with seawater and lye. The city's rhythm, hammer on anvil, hawker cry, gull shriek, returned one uncertain beat at a time, though each note wavered as if expecting the tune to stumble back into screams. Catelyn Stark stood on the tower of the Hand's balcony, surveying lanes that still shimmered with soot and fear, and felt how fragile conquest could be. A captured city was no more than stone until hearts accepted the new banner. Below, Stormlander's sentries kept uneasy watch beside Northmen in dark cloaks still crusted with green scorch. Soldiers who yesterday would have traded axes now leaned on spear hafts comparing burns, muttering of sisters left at home or lovers lost on smoky streets. Shared blood bound quicker than any feast. Yet every comrade's grin might hide a wound festering beneath quilted doublet. Infection slew faster than sword. Sansa slept at last in chambers once meant for a princess. Catelyn had sat with her through sunset, stroking sweat-damp hair while the girl's nightmares thrashed. Tyrion's kindness in smuggling Arya out, whispered between sobs, warmed and chilled Catelyn at once. The imp's motives were his own, but the deed might save a child. Now she prayed Arya rode north disguised amongst smallfolk caravans flooding River Road, blade sharp and wits keener. Robb held counsel in Maegor's holdfast, gray wind stretched at his feet like a living executioner's promise. Stannis presided beside him, rubies glimmering at throat and wrist, Davos at left hand, Galbart Glover at right. Across the table knelt Tyrion Lannister, shackled but unbowed, face mottled purple where falling masonry had caught him. Beside him stood Ser Jaime's son Tommen, eyes wide, and Princess Myrcella trembling in moss-green velvet. Cersei remained in the September of Baelor, guarded by Mormont she-bears. Joffrey lingered 2 cells beneath, thrashing against manacles, howling threats that echoed like a dog chained too long. We have their crown, Stannis said, voice flat as tide-carved stone. And their heirs. Yet a lioness hunted bleeds poison. Tywin marches. Mace Tyrell closes from Bitterbridge. Euron Greyjoy raids the Arbor. War multiplies. Robb's fingers drummed on table oak. Offer ransom for children, hold queen behind walls. With Cersei captive, Tywin cannot loose wildfire of his own. He will treat. Tyrion coughed a dry laugh. You misread my lord, father. He values legacy above life. Burn his cubs, he forges new heirs in fire. Only his name must endure. Davos leaned forward, scars catching lamplight. Names scorch as quick as flesh. King Robert broke Targaryen dragons by shattering the tail of their invincibility. Break the Lannister legend and small folk will spit on golden lions. Stannis' mouth twisted. A lesson for poets. Swords speak surer. Catelyn entered then, cloak whispering. All eyes turned. Robb's chin lifted, seeking counsel in her gaze as once he had sought milk at her breast. She addressed Tyrion first. Lord Lannister, do you love these children? The dwarf's mismatched eyes glinted. Truly? As I loved my brother, through jest, wine, and mortal peril. They are innocent victims of dynastic folly as ever babes are. Then write your father, she said. A letter in your own hand promising children's safety if hostilities cease and a truce is sworn at Riverrun. Break those terms and the dynasty ends with their breath. Keep them and the lion line lives under northern eyes. Tyrion bowed his head. I will pen it. He may frame it for jest, but the ink will stand. Stannis tapped knuckle on parchment. Very well. Send ravens to Lannisport and Highgarden. A fortnight's grace. On the 15th day, if no acceptance, we march again. He turned to Robb. Meanwhile Greyjoy sails bite our back. The north cannot spare men, but ships stand idle. The Onion Knight will command the fleet against Ironborn. We strike at Old Wyke, cut Balon's lungs. Robb nodded, though worry etched deep. The north bleeds. Ramsay Snow still holds Winterfell. My brothers will live if the Dreadfort's dogs learn wolves bite harder. Stannis finished. Roose Bolton hunts him. Trust your bannermen. Catelyn's stomach tightened at Bolton's name, but she held tongue. The truce letter mattered now. Suspicion could wait. That evening she sat with Sansa again. The girl gazed at torchlit rafters, voice thin. Mother, will they let Joffrey live? His fate rests with kings, Catelyn said softly. Your father taught me mercy must sometimes bend before duty. Sansa squeezed sheets. I loved a shadow of him, not the boy who ordered father's death. I know that now, but killing children, it feels wrong. Catelyn brushed tears from Sansa's cheek. That is your father's heart speaking. We will do all we can. When Sansa drifted to sleep, Catelyn walked hallways where carved dragons loomed. At the small hall she found Tyrion writing by lamplight, guards at door. She waited until Quill stilled. You mean to keep your word? She asked. He blew on ink. I mean to live. And I prefer my niece and nephew do as well. He sealed scroll with crimson wax-shaped lion. Twist the blade too far and my father may snap it. Leave him path to dignity, he might surprise you. Your father's dignity cost my husband's life. So it did. I make no excuse. She left him thus, ghosts heavy on her shoulders. Ravens beat wings into dawn's red wash. One bore Tyrion's plea south, another carried Stannis' ultimatum west. 2 riders departed for Riverrun with copies. Then the city braced for siege that might never arrive. Carpenters mended piers, smiths forged spearheads from melted jewelry taken in tax. Septas boiled water for orphanages swelling by score each hour with children who could not find burned doorways home. Robb walked ramparts each sunrise. Gray wind prowled ahead, muzzle lifting to breeze thick with char. Catelyn joined when she could, noting how lines at his eyes deepened, how shoulders bore armor's drag even at rest. Yet hope flickered when ravens arrived from the twins. Walder Frey agreed to seat a grandson on Seaguard's council in exchange for continued safe crossing, no further hostages demanded. Edmure's laughter at the news rolled down corridors like freed River Run. A small victory, but a needed one. 3 days later fire bells tolled, sails off Blackwater, iron studs glinting under noon sun. Fleetmen hauled rigs, bows bristling. Catelyn stood beside Davos on quayside. Ironborn, she asked. Or Tyrell relief? Neither, he murmured, squinting. See the standard? A white kraken on blue surged atop foremost mast, Victorian Greyjoy. But below it snapped an unfamiliar pennon, a direwolf gnawing kraken tentacle, stark gray on black. A hush fell as sailors recognized shapes. The ship beached on mudflat. First over gunwale leapt a youth clad in mailed shirt too big at shoulders. Bran Stark carried on Hodder's broad back. His eyes shone with tears bright as river spray. Behind them scrambled Rickon, filthy, hair-snarled nest, clinging to shaggy dog scruff. Osha vaulted after, spear in hand. The dock erupted in shouts, Northmen surged to knees, swords raised skyward. Bran searched faces until he found his mother. Catelyn froze, heart clamped by equal parts disbelief and fierce, roaring joy. She crossed ramp without recalling how feet moved, arms closing around sons she thought lost to ashes. Victarion Greyjoy strode down plank, huge and scarred. Your pups fled Drefortwoods, reached Deepwoodmont. My niece Asha traded them to me for safe pass north. Thought a show of honor might stay wolf fangs when tide shifts. Davos eyed the Kraken Lord warily. Or when Balan's banners fall. Victarion shrugged massive shoulders. Honor, pardon, both lighter than chains. I return what is yours, Lady Stark. Remember the name that brought them. He boarded again, sails catching evening gust, fleet wheeling seaward before guards could debate. Catelyn knelt with Bran in her lap, Rickon curled against her side and thanked every god of snow, river, and fire. News of the boys' salvation swept camp like summer gale, lifting hearts beyond hunger, pain, dread. Even Stannis cracked a smile, though Melisandre's ruby glimmered darker when she watched Bran's limp legs as though studying puzzle pieces of prophecy. That night feasts burned in every courtyard. Men toasted Greyjoy treachery turned boon, women sang western reels, children chased Grey Wind's great tale until the dire wolf collapsed in playful huff. But joy birthed urgency, with heirs safe, Robb's need to reclaim Winterfell sharpened. Roose Bolton had sent no ravens since last message. Catelyn sensed storm. She urged Robb to send Galbard's scouts up the neck, but roads lay clogged with refugees and Sel's word bans. Progress would crawl. 2 nights later, thunder announced a different reckoning. Tywin's host crested the western hills, tens of thousands under Moonpale standards. Yet they halted at sight of burning beacons spelling truce in High Valyrian, Stannis' gambit, if not his tongue. The next day a single rider approached bearing Lannister colors and white flag. Ser Kevan dismounted before CIT. Wygate demanded audience. Stannis received him in the throne room, the iron throne draped in wolf and stag banners. Catelyn watched from gallery. Kevan bowed stiffly. Lord Tywin accepts honorable parley at Riverrun in 12 days. Hostilities pause until then. Children exchanged as goodwill, Queen Cersei for King Joffrey escorted to Halfway Inn, Lady Sansa returned with Princess Myrcella and Lord Tommen to Casterly Rock as wards. Under oath they remain unharmed. Murmurs rippled. Robb rose. Sansa is no ward, she is Stark. She rides north with us. Kevin's gaze softened. Then Tommen shall ride alongside as guest of Winterfell until treaty signed. Tyrion's mouth quirked. My sweet nephew tends chickens better than intrigue. He'll be safer chasing snow hares inside your walls than dodging daggers in ours. Stannis nodded. So agreed. 12 days grace. Parchment sealed terms. Catelyn exhaled when quills stilled, the war slowed, though battlefields yet smoldered. Preparations churned. Stannis remained to garrison King's Landing, leaving Davos to shadow Greyjoy fleet. Robb would escort hostages north to Riverrun, thence to Winterfell after signing. Catelyn oversaw convoy, wagons of grain, barrels of water, litters for wounded, a portable sept for Myrcella's prayers. She kissed Sansa's brow when dawn marched them outbound, Bran beside her in a cushioned saddle contraption Maester Franken devised, Rickon astride shaggy dog like unruly night. The King's Road north smelled of scorched harvest, but flowers pushed through charred crust, yellow daisies, red poppies, stubborn life. Sansa rode near Myrcella, the girl's whispers sometimes edged with giggles, trauma forged strange friendships. Tommen kept Bran company, comparing tales of wooden knights and lemon cake contests. Guards chuckled to hear 2 heirs of rival houses debating whose mother baked sweeter crust. At Maidenpool line split. Stark's and escort veered west along Trident, Lannister contingent south toward Duskendale Ferry. Myrcella hugged Sansa, tears bright. Tommen clung to Bran a moment, promising to visit Winterfell's gods would someday. Then they parted, banners diverging like flocks scattering before hawk cry. Catelyn's caravan pushed upriver under mottled sky. 3 days out, Galbart's outriders found Fellwood passable. 2 more saw them skirt ruins of Harrenhal, black towers biting clouds like rotten fangs. Catelyn shivered at heatless wind sighing through burnt arrow slits, stone haunted by too many fires. On 7th day a rider galloped hard, face gray. Bolton's banners hang on Winterfell, he told Robb, voice shaking. But direwolf flies beneath, Rickard Karstark's men hoist it. Bolton slain in skirmish with Snow's reavers. Bastard fled to marshes, burned fields behind. Bran and Rickon presumed dead, until your ravens. He bowed to Bran, still alive, weeping relief. Robb's glare blazed. "Ride," he ordered Glover. "We claim what is ours." Host quickened, fatigue forgotten. At Riverrun they found Edmure greeting refugees, castle crowded with tents bright as autumn market. The Tully Lord embraced Catelyn, tears smearing dirt on cheeks. He marveled at Bran's wheeled saddle contraption, ruffled Rickon's tangled mop. Sansa sobbed in his arms. For a night they rested, washing road dust, mending tack, burying newly dead from Reaver raids along Red Fork. Truce talks convened in Riverrun's Tapestry Hall. Tywin arrived with modest escort, golden armor dulled by long ride, face iron. Behind him strode Mace Tyrell, plump jowls quivering in forced smile, and Prince Oberyn Martell representing Dornish neutrality turned curiosity. Knotward charges exchanged. Queen Cersei, wild-eyed, met Joffrey's bitter embrace under watchful spears. Tommen descended ramp to stand at Bran's side, uncertain but brave. Catelyn noted how Tywin's gaze thawed one blink at sight of his grandson safe. Negotiations stretched 3 days. Stannis' envoys demanded lion taxes to rebuild Riverlands. Tywin offered grain, not gold. Robb insisted on northern independence. Tywin balked, yet Mace Tyrell whispered that roses preferred wolves on wall to dragons in east, so concession formed. North to rule itself, Riverlands granted semi-autonomy under Tully. Lannisters to retain Westerlands reached to pay half levy for rebuilding. Dorne remained aloof, securing free trade rights. Balon Greyjoy's claim nullified under threat of united fleets. Final obstacle, Jaime's death. Tywin demanded Kingslayer's bones. Catelyn offered urn of ashes taken from river. Tywin's lips barely twitched, but he accepted. Alliance sealed with ink, blood drops, and witness oaths, including Bran representing Winterfell's heart tree. Feast followed. Music lacked lutes enough for cheer, but wine flowed. Oberyn teased Sansa into dance, bladesmiths hammered dirks as impromptu drums. Tywin retired early, face pale. Word spread the Lion Lord coughed blood. Some whispered grief, others venom swallowed. Next dawn Robb's column rode home. Catelyn looked back at Riverrun's towers where she once passed girlhood summers fishing for silver trout. Peace banners fluttered, but she sensed how fleeting silk could be against rain of greed. The neck greeted them with damp breezes carrying pine and peat. Moat Cailin lay abandoned, Greyjoys fled seaward, but corpses of flayed men nailed to gateposts testified Bolton's passage. Bran shuddered, Rickon clung to Shaggy Dog's mane. Robb ordered decent burials, though earth proved swamp-sodden. 2 days south of Winterfell they met Karstark outriders escorting wagons of smoked pork and barley. Lord Rickard himself knelt before Bran and Rickon, tears cutting channels through ash streaks. "Thought I avenged your deaths," he rasped. "Forgive blind grief." Bran extended hand. "You fought for us." The old lord wept harder. Dawn broke crisp when first sight of Winterfell's walls rose between leaf-bare sentinels. Rebuilt timbers gleamed raw, but gates stood open, direwolf banner flying proud. Small folk lined road, faces smudged yet smiling, chanting "Stark, Stark." Bran's eyes glittered. Robb dismounted, walked last furlong on foot with gray wind, swords sheathed. Catelyn followed, heart thunderous. Within yard, Maester Luwin leaned on staff, tears bright. "My lords, my lady, home awaits." Fire pits crackled where once ashes smoldered. Snowmelt trickled through masonry scars, but new mortar shored cracks. Children chased each other, hollering names of slain heroes like part of game. That night Winterfell feasted on venison stew thick with carrots, bread studded with oats. Bran recited adventures of swamp escape. Rickon dozed with head in Sansa's lap. Tommen shyly fed Shaggy Dog scraps until Direwolf licked his face, making him squeal delight. Robb toasted absent ghosts. Ned, Ser Roderick, Maester Luwin who yet lived but ached old bones and vowed Hall would never fall again. Catelyn met his eyes, saw manhood tempered by trial, felt pride fierce as northern wind. But when revel quieted, she slipped to Godwood. Moon-gilded heart tree's pale trunk, red leaves rustling whispers. She knelt, palms damp on moss, and spoke names, Arya wandering, Jon across wall unknown, men and women dead so children could laugh. She asked no favor, only strength to protect peace born of such cost. Footsteps soft behind. Tyrion stood, cloak wrapped tight. "Crowded halls, sharper than court intrigues," he said. "I find quiet where despised, not feared." "Do you regret coming north?" she asked. "Not yet. South becomes complicated." He traced Tree's eyeless face. "Your gods have no mouths, yet here." Mine drink well, but seldom answer. Perhaps answer lies in what we do, not what they say. Tyrion smiled, turned toward lights flickering through castle windows. Then let us do better than our fathers. Spring stirred sooner than memory could recall. Snowmelt fed green shoots through courtyard flagstones. Sansa planted lemon trees in warmed glass house gifted by Manderleys. Bran studied ravens with Maester Luwin, planning network to knit kingdoms in peace. Rickon tamed Shaggy Dog to pull sled races for smallfolk children. Tommen learned archery from Karstark captains, arrow clusters tight by summer's first rise. Robb rode to White Harbor seeking trade pacts. Catelyn managed keep with flower dust on skirts, balancing tallies, mediating disputes over burnt fields and new fence lines. Tyrion drafted charters establishing Riverlands as free confederation under Stark Tully protection, quill scratching late by candle. News from South trickled. Stannis formed Council of Lords sworn to rebuild Crownlands. Dorne signed treaty. Reach replanted scorched acres. Lannisters withdrew to Casterly Rock. Tywin rarely seen outside Solar. Grief or illness, rumors murmur. The world exhaled. Yet one violet dusk as Catelyn watched Bran practice sling stones, a raven swooped with ribbon blacker than starless night. Scroll bore Karth seal unknown. Within 5 words, dragons fly west. War awakes. She felt weight of prophecy shiver spine. Peacetime might prove but a breathing space between storms. Young kings must soon shoulder new wars. But for this moment children's laughter rang through tower windows, hearths crackled in rebuilt hall, and moon rose serene above battlements proud. Catelyn closed eyes, whispering the litany she had carried since Blade first fell in Riverrun's courtyard. Bran, Rickon, Sansa, Robb, Arya, Jon, names that anchored hearts. When she opened them again, Winterfell's fires glowed strong, answering stars overhead. Whatever storms brewed beyond horizon, they would face together. Wolves ran best in packs. Wind sighed through pines, carrying scent of snowmelt and new grass. Somewhere beyond walls, shadow-gray wind howled, a long, rolling note, neither grief nor triumph, but promise. It echoed down ramparts, across quiet fields, up to tower heights where banners stirred. And in that sound Catelyn heard her future, not peace perpetual, but resilience. Not the end of fear, but the will to stand each time fear returned. She turned toward hall where her children waited, where firelight spilled like welcome onto dark stone, and she walked forward, unafraid.